Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and this is a weird type of video for me to make. I am constantly asked online by new creators what type of content they think the Yu-Gi-Oh space is specifically missing, and my answer is always the same: primers. In Magic the Gathering, the second you pick up a deck, you can Google the name of the deck and then the word primer to find a 50-page document someone has written about building the deck, card options, deck choices, viability, and how you can play against a lot of the major metagame threats. In Yu-Gi-Oh, the best thing you can hope to accomplish is typing that deck's name into YouTube and finding a combo video by almost exclusively El Exordio de la Duelista, which is helpful of course, but doesn't give you the macro level strategy that's required to play a deck competently. Unfortunately, this type of content rankles with the algorithm. It's long form, it requires constant pausing and stopping and starting, and unfortunately, the videos take a ton of time to research and edit. But Master Duel made a very weird decision recently to release Mathmech Circular, one of my favorite cards of all time, into the metagame. A metagame that doesn't include Sprite or Tier Limit, I might add. If Master Duel's previous release schedule is anything to go by, this is a deck with a pretty clear expiration date, and I want to make sure as many people can play this deck as adequately as possible for the short period that it's going to be really good. So I played a bunch of Mathmech, and I figure I will impart those lessons onto you now in a primer style video. I don't make this type of impassioned plea often on the channel, but I really would appreciate if you would share this if you found it interesting. That's because, as I mentioned earlier, these types of videos don't really do well algorithmically, and while I would just like to upload Twitter threads until I die, I should probably do something that actually matters at some point. So today I'm going to be breaking down a ton for you about Mathmech. First, historically, what the deck was capable of doing, what Circular's release did in the TCG, deck building with a couple of lists including mine and distant coders, combos that you can integrate into your Mathmech play, considerations that I have found over months of playing the deck, and of course, a specific amount of matchup knowledge. Now, I do want to warn you, this information is Master Duel specific. You can of course apply a lot of the lessons to the TCG or the OCG, but we're going to be talking a lot about like Maxi and Runick being a top tier deck, so take it all with a grain of salt. And with that, let's jump in. Mathmech is a series of Cyburst-type monsters released in deck build pack Mystic Fighters. Mystic Fighters is famous for being the first deck build pack with no playable decks to build. Oh, God, I hope Dyer doesn't get a hold of this. Generators in there. Mathmech's gimmick is, well, math. All of its monsters change the attack or defense stats of individual monsters, or sometimes modulate their levels, in order to make it exceptionally easy to go into their on-theme synchro monsters. Most of them are unaffected by opponents' card effects if they are in the extra monster zone, and I'm sure you're familiar with Mathmech Sigma, a big boy who hits hard. Now, while it's very funny that Yu-Gi-Oh released a Sigma male, the deck was not very good. A big boy who hits hard in the EMZ was a strategy that a lot of other decks had already attempted, Crusadia being the most consistently played. Duelists were ready for the strategy, and Mathmech wasn't even the best at doing that, and for that reason it was thrown into the garbage bin of terrible deck build pack archetypes. Until the release of Mathmech Diameter. This card gave the deck a decent normal summon that could occasionally flex into negates before you actually commit to your Sigma male. The deck was playable in some capacity, but not anything you needed to be prepared for. Then everything changed in 2022 with the release of Power of the Elements. Alongside the sprites and the tier limits, Pote contained Mathmech Circular, one of the most powerful individual cards in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. Circular wasn't just a good Mathmech card, it was a good card period, and was a huge boon to every Cyburst strategy. Sure, it enabled Mathmech to become an incredibly powerful, flexible, and repeatable combo deck, but it also was an effective starter and extender in both Adagnister and Code Talker. Which brings us to Mathmech's historic position in the TCG. At the release of Pote, Mathmech was expected to be the third best deck in the format behind Sprite and Tier Limit. This is for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it was expected that the best deck was going to be Sprite, and Mathmech has a pretty good matchup versus that strategy. Second, it's not that difficult to build. Its ceiling was accessed a lot higher than Tier Limit, which took weeks before people landed on a decent deck. Unfortunately, the format continued to evolve, and Mathmech was a casualty to that evolution. While Sprite was an incredibly good deck, duelists were able to find consistent and powerful builds of Tier much quicker than anticipated, utilizing the danger monsters to create what we referred to colloquially as Casino Tier. Mathmech had a miserable Tier Limit matchup. Sending cards from your opponent's hand to the graveyard isn't particularly good when that card can just be Sheeran. And as Darkwing Blast loomed, the deck was relegated to unplayable status. The Bestials banished light and dark monsters from the graveyard, and all the good Mathmechs are those. Fluandereeze would eventually take up the mantle of third best deck in a format of Sprite and Tier Limit, and with the release of the Ishizu cards, the door has functionally been closed on Mathmech's viability in the TCG. So what makes Master Duel different? Firstly, it's a best of one. Mathmech has something that a lot of other decks don't: a powerful, competent line going first, and a consistent OTK going second. This means that in a ladder scenario or a best of one tournament series, this is a fantastic option for duelists who don't want to rely on die rolls. Secondly, Maxi exists. Mathmech has an incredibly powerful line that plays around Maxi in some capacity, letting your opponent go +1 but ending on functionally an identical board to full combo. And third, there's no tier limit. Without having to contend with its worst matchup, Mathmech is free to remove cards like Topologic Zerovoros they were playing in the extra to beat this blisteringly bad matchup. I will warn you though, Fluwandereeze and Runick remain very playable in Master Duel, and both of those decks do tend to give Mathmech trouble if they win the die roll. That said, let's get into the meat of this, talking about the decks. For reference, here's the list that I'm playing in Master Duel currently. Any discussion of card interaction or choices is going to be made from the position of playing this shell, but I will give you some alternative builds and a ton of cards you can jam into flex slots. Let's begin with a discussion of the Mathmechs. Everything revolves around Mathmech Circular. This card allows you to send a Mathmech monster except Circular from your deck to the graveyard, special this from your hand, then you can only attack with one monster for the rest of the turn. If a Mathmech is normal or special summoned to your field while you control this monster, you can add a Mathmech spell trap from your deck to your hand. I love playing 3 of this card. If I could play 20, I probably would, but he's the reason we are also playing 3 copies of Silent Mining and 3 copies of Small World, though we'll talk a little bit more about the latter momentarily. We're also on 3 copies of Mathmech Diameter. When this card is normal summoned, you can target a level 4 Cyberse in your graveyard, special it can't activate its effects, and if a Mathmech monster was Synchro or Xyz summoned with this tuner on the field, it gains the following effect. Once per turn, during the turn this card was special summoned, when your opponent activates a card or effect, you can negate that effect. Notably, it does not have to be attached to that monster to retain the negate, so frequently you will be able to detach 2 from Alimbertion, including this card, and retain a negate that your opponent will not remember exists. This card is searchable over the course of the combo, but I am still playing 3. That's because it's just as powerful to open as it is to search. There are a lot of scenarios in which your Alimbertion is going to be Infinite Impermanenced or Ash Blossomed, and it's really great to have the redundancy in deck necessary to beat back those hand traps. Case in point, I'm playing 3 copies of this, Mathmech Sigma. Theoretically, you could play 1 or 2 Mathmech Sigma. You only need 1 in deck in order to send off the Circular. If you control no monsters in the extra monster zone while this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can special it, but banish it when it leaves the field, and you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn except Cyberses. The reason I like playing 3 is because it opens up a ton of very interesting lines against Maxi in particular. Often, you'll open something like a Circular and a Sigma. In that case, you can activate Circular sending a Diameter to the graveyard. Because you're on 3, it doesn't really matter if one of them goes to the grave over the course of the combo. Frequently, that will prompt an opponent to chain Maxi, at which point you can normal summon the Sigma, overlay for an Alimbertion, giving them 1/1, and then use Alimbertion to get a copy of Superfactorial. That's functionally your entire combo with a Diameter in the grave for the low cost of a +1 against a hand trap that should have ended your turn. Outside of that, we are playing 2 Mathmech Subtraction, which can target a face-up monster on the field, locks you into Cyberse monsters, and specials this from your hand, and the targeted monster loses 1,000 attack until the end of this turn, and 2 Addition, which does the same, but with gaining. These cards are fine. They are hard once per turn free special summons from the hand. Routinely, they allow you to play through hand traps. I don't really like them as extension because you don't really need it. That's why I'm only playing 2 apiece, though I constantly waver on if I should be playing more or less. Notably, Addition does come up occasionally when you are attempting to go for lethal with an access code talker. And finally, we're playing 1 copy of Nabla. Nabla can tribute a Cyberse monster to special a Mathmech from your deck, and if it's sent to the graveyard, you can target a Cyberse monster you control in the EMC. It can make 2 attacks on monsters each battle phase this turn. This card is a lot more powerful in decks that include Multiplication. It has a lot of unique interactions with that card in particular, but I still think it's fine for our purposes. Sometimes I want the flexibility of being able to choose between normal summoning a Diameter or occasionally getting to a Circular from deck in a hand that otherwise cannot make it. Honestly, the double monster effect doesn't come up often, but the card is flexible enough that I do think it's valuable to include it as singleton copy. This is a pretty decent time to talk about Small World. Small World can get you pretty much any part of your line. Mathmech Circular or Mathmech Diameter are the usual suspects. You've got a ton of different ways to get there, but I like using the bridge of Link Infra Flyer. This card I think is incredibly powerful. It's a free special summon that does not activate to a zone a Link monster points to. Of course, it can set up something like a Disciple into a Devotee in a hand that's been hand trapped a couple of times, but notably, it is a fantastic bridge for almost everything in your deck. It can go from any name to any name because nothing is a 2-wind Cyberse. If you open the Infra Flyer, you can use Effect Veiler as your bridge. It's light, which allows you to get to Circular or Diameter. If you open a Maxi, you can use Small World to change the Maxi into the level 2 Infra Flyer into Mathmech Circular or Diameter. And in a pinch, Small World can use something like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring to bridge between fire-type names. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is probably the best Small World deck ever. Outside of that, we're playing a couple of concessions to this format, 1 Harpy's Feather Duster and 2 Cosmic Cyclone. These are mostly for Runick and Floodgate strategies, which do trip up Mathmech. For some reason, Called By is at 2 and Crossout Designator is at 1. I'm playing both of these cards specifically to prevent maxis from resolving. Crossout Designator also has a lot of utility in formats in which Mathmech is popular because, of course, you can live the dream and banish your opponent's superfactorial. We've got some hand traps. I like Effect Veiler because of its bridge potential. Maxi, of course, is very powerful. Ash Blossom stops Maxi, and I think Infinite Impermanence is very well positioned. It can, like, negate Hugin in some really funny scenarios where you draw it plus a Harpy's Feather Duster. And our searchable Mathmech spell traps are Mathmech Equation, which allows you to target a Mathmech monster in your graveyard, special it, and gains 1,000 attack until the end of the turn, and the one, the only Mathmech Superfactorial. This card allows you to target up to 3 Mathmech monsters in your graveyard with different names, activate one of these effects, special summon them, their effects are negated, then synchro summon 1 Mathmech Synchro monster, or special summon them but their effects are negated, then immediately after this effect resolves, Xyz a Mathmech Xyz monster using only those monsters. Frequently, this is going to be a +4. That's because you can overlay 3 monsters from the graveyard for a copy of Mathmech Laplation, which is kind of like Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. It allows you to send a random card from your opponent's hand to the graveyard, a monster they control to the graveyard, and a spell trap they control to the graveyard, and if it's being made with Mathmech Diameter, it will retain a negate. It also prevents Mathmech cards you control from being destroyed by a card effect, but realistically, that effect is not going to come up particularly often. Most of your game plan surrounds this specific interaction, setting up a Superfactorial for 3 and then activating it on your opponent's turn. We're playing 2 copies of Laplation because frequently I find that I actually need to resolve Superfactorial twice over the course of the game against decks that have a proficient grind game, things like Branded, for instance. Mathmech Alimbertion is the other Mathmech Xyz monster. 2+ level 4 monsters, you contribute a monster to special a level 4 Mathmech monster from your hand or graveyard, and if it's Xyzed, you can detach 2 to 4 materials from this card and activate the appropriate effect. Importantly, the 2 adds a Mathmech card from deck to hand, and the 4 adds a spell trap from your deck to hand. That tribute effect doesn't necessarily have to tribute itself, so frequently you are going to be using this card not only to search your playmakers like Diameter, but also to tribute this card, Link Devotee. Link Devotee and Link Disciple form a really powerful pair. This card locks you from Link summoning anything but under Link 3 monsters for the remainder of the turn, and if tributed, gets 2 tokens to your side of the field. That's 3 material with the Alimbertion because it will cycle for a Mathmech Engrave. Link Disciple can also cause a tribute to happen, but usually you're not going to be using this effect unless your Alimbertion has been negated by something like Infinite Impermanence. Over the course of your first turn, you're going to get a lot of material on your side of the field, and you'll be using it for a Cyburst Wicked. This card, if a monster is summoned to a zone that it points to, allows you to add a Cyburst Tuner from your deck to your hand, like Diameter or Nabla. You'll be converting one of those tokens likely into Lingaribo. I really like this card in the deck, though I do think it's in the flex slot right now. When your opponent activates a trap card, you contribute this card to negate that card's effect, and you banish it. This means that you can not only protect an IP Masquerena that's part of your turn 1 setup from something like an Infinite Impermanence, you can also hedge it as a decent trade for a Floodgate like There Can Be Only One, which would otherwise just win the game. As mentioned, Masquerena is part of your end board. You'll be making it with a couple of tokens on your side of the field. This card's important for a number of reasons. Its existence means that your opponent is going to play around Nightmare Unicorn because you could theoretically have it in your extra deck, but of course in reality your only real target for it is this one, Apollosa, Bow of the Goddess. Splash Mage, Transcode Talker, and Update Jammer are all part of an OTK combo that includes the one, the only Access Code Talker. These give you the utility necessary to be able to reborn enough Cyburst monsters to make this from a board of pretty much anything. And finally, I want to talk pretty extensively about Decode Talker Heatsoul. Many duelists are not convinced that you should be making the end board that I do in games. That's Cyburst Wicked, Lingaribo, and Masquerena. They instead want to make Decode Talker Heatsoul. I don't think that hand traps are powerful enough to enable a Heatsoul control style of game plan in terms of success, but I won't deny that the card is exceptionally powerful. Usually you are playing either this with a second copy of Splash Mage, so you can use Splash Mage to get to this, and then on the crackback to get to Access Code Talker, or you are playing a more comprehensive Masquerena setup. I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too because there's a lot of scenarios in which I find that I am in a position to beat back an opponent who has discarded a couple of cards from hand in order to trade for mine, things like Ash Blossom and Infinite Impermanence, if I could just get ahead of them in card advantage, and this is a card that allows me to do so very easily. If you're looking for a different way to play this deck, Distant Coder just hit Diamond 1 playing this one. It eschews cards like the 3rd Sigma and the 3rd Maxi for a 3 of Parallel Exceed. It's got a main deck Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, alongside a Mathmech Multiplication. We'll be talking pretty extensively about all of those cards and why you would play them. You can see in the extra deck, he has given up the Heatsoul for a copy of Sigma, which I will admit is very funny, but I don't think is particularly competitive. Let's talk about cards you could be playing. The most popular one is this, Parallel Exceed. It's not hard to see why. This Wind 8-star 2K Cyburst is a fantastic small world bridge, and it enables a bunch of really funny setups. If you're on Almirage in the extra deck, likely over the Lingaribo, you can normal summon a Handtrap, link it off for the Almirage, and get somewhere close to full combo. The reason I'm not playing that is because Exceed isn't actually full combo on its own. Because your Alambertian wasn't made with Mathmech monsters, you won't have enough into the graveyard to make it to a 3-material superfactorial unless you also have a couple of extenders. And if you have a couple of extenders, theoretically, you could just make the Alambertian with those extenders, and then all of your problems would be solved. Mathmech Multiplication is occasionally played as a one-of in this strategy because it has the ability to summon Mathmech Sigma Male. That card is very, very funny. More competitively, it can be used to increase the attack of an access code talker you intend to attack with twice over the course of a turn. I know you all want to play this card. I understand. It's very funny. It's unaffected by card effects except Mathmech cards while this card is in the extra monster zone. If it battles an opponent's monster, battle damage it inflicts is doubled, and if it's destroyed by battle or destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can add a Mathmech from your deck to your hand. This card's impressively powerful and gets a lot stronger when it's made with Nabla and maybe a multiplication. That said, I don't think it actually does very much. Because it has to be in the extra monster zone, it gatekeeps you off of a lot of really powerful Link monsters. It conflicts very badly with Cyberse Wicked, which is actually really difficult to get out of the extra monster zone because it's immune to battle and card effect destruction. A lot of people have touted its competitiveness against Runick because they don't have a conventional out to this card. I would argue that Runick is more than capable of just putting up exactly one monster in defense position every turn, never interacting with the board state, and just milling you out of cards. Splash Mage. I'm already playing Splash Mage. I'm talking about the second copy. If you are going for a Heatsoul open, you will do so by using 2 Cyberse monsters to make a Splash Mage, reborning one of them, and then using the Water attribute Splash Mage and usually the Light attribute monster to go into a Heatsoul, then retaining a Splash Mage for the follow-up in order to make an access code talker. If you're wondering what you're looking at, this is an unofficial online client called Dueling Book. It has a solo mode where you can practice combos manually. If you don't feel comfortable with the deck, I really would recommend it before hopping into Master Duel or spending gems on it. First up, I'm going to be showing off the bread and butter combo of the strategy. This is what just Mathmech Circular can do. First, we're going to activate the effect of the Circular. That's going to allow us to send a copy of Sigma from the deck to the graveyard. We'll special summon the Circular, then we can activate the effect of Sigma in the graveyard once again to special summon it to our side of the field. Because a Mathmech was summoned to our side of the field, we can activate Circular's effect and grab ourselves a copy of Mathmech Superfactorial. Next, we're going to overlay for a copy of Alambertian. Alambertian's effect will trigger here. We will detach 2 material in order to search a Mathmech. We are going to grab from deck to hand a copy of Diameter. We will normal the Diameter. That's going to allow us to bring back a Circular, and then afterwards we will get linking. The Diameter to the graveyard for a copy of Link Disciple, and the Circular to the graveyard for a copy of Devotee. We're doing it in this way, of course, because these monsters have levels and Alambertian doesn't. We'll activate the effect of Devotee. That's a mandatory that locks you. Then we will activate the effect of the Alambertian, tributing the Devotee to summon back. Any Mathmech here will do. We'll go with Diameter. Devotee's graveyard effect will trigger. Because it was tributed, we get 2 tokens to our side of the field, and now we can get Link summoning some more. The Disciple and the Alambertian to the graveyard in order to get a Wicked. Important to get the Alambertian there because you really want to retain these Link monsters in graveyard for access code pops on the following turn. We'll follow that up with a Lingaribo. This will trigger the effect of the Wicked. We can banish the Alambertian, which is functionally useless at this point, in order to grab a Diameter for next turn, and then we can link these 2 off for a copy of Masquerena. We'll set the Superfactorial and pass. This looks like a very innocuous board. It's incredibly powerful. The Lingaribo protects our Masquerena until we get to the main phase. When our opponent commits to the board, we can go for Superfactorial, summoning back the Diameter, the Circular, and the Sigma, and then immediately overlaying for a copy of Primathmech Laplation. Once Laplation hits the field, its effect will activate, and we can detach any number of material from this monster in order to trade for functionally an equal amount of our opponent's material. 1 back row, 1 monster, and 1 card out of the hand. They're now down 3 cards, and Laplation retains a negate because it was made using Diameter this turn. When our opponent starts to combo, we can use Masquerena to send her and the Wicked to the graveyard for a 2 material Appaloosa, a 3 if we think we don't need the Lingaribo, and then on the crackback, we are able to normal summon the Diameter, then do the entire line once again. And this is all off of 1 card, of course. The Heatsoul variant is a lot simpler. You can just go circular here, sending a copy of Sigma to the graveyard. We'll skip a step and special the Sigma directly to our side of the field before activating the effect of the circular and grabbing ourselves a super factorial. After that, we will use the circular and the Sigma in order to go into, you guessed it, a copy of Adamancipator. We'll activate Adamancipator's effect, detaching these two for a diameter. We will normal summon a diameter, activate the effect, bring back a Mathmech. And from here, we can basically do whatever we want. One end board that individuals like to go for frequently is using circular and diameter here to grab a Splash Mage. Splash Mage effect, let's grab back a circular. Splash Mage and Adamancipator for a Transcode Talker. Transcode Talker, target the Splash Mage, and then the Water Splash Mage and the Light Circular for a Heatsoul. The advantage this has over conventional Heatsoul lines is it's co-linked to the Transcode Talker, meaning it'll gain 500 attack plus an additional 500 because of its own effect, and it can't be targeted by card effects. This is a fine setup, and then in the draw phase, in order to play around triple attack, you can draw an additional card, but as you can see, there's enough cards in the deck that aren't hand traps that sometimes it's just empty advantage. We'll do a quick OTK here as well. Let's say you're going second. We'll go for a circular, sending a copy of Sigma, and then summoning it to our side of the field. That'll trigger the effect of the circular, and here we will get Mathmech Equation. We'll overlay for Adamancipator and activate the effect in order to grab from deck to hand a diameter. Then we will normal summon the diameter, grab ourselves a Sigma, and then we'll get Diameter and Adamancipator to the graveyard for Splash Mage effect, and then Sigma and Diameter to the graveyard for Update Jammer. Update and Splash Mage to the graveyard for an Access Code Talker. Update Jammer 1, Access Code 2. This is a 4300 access code that can attack twice, and that is lethal damage. Now you'll notice that that was a one card setup that still retained this equation in hand. Each additional extender or card like equation usually lets you play through one additional piece of back row or interaction. So a 5-card hand with a couple of these can easily chew through a substandard board after a couple of hand traps have been fired. Let's say that you don't have access to a circular. That's still not that big of a problem, especially if you have freebies like this. Here we can activate Sigma's effect, special summoning itself because we don't have anything in the extra monster zone. Then we can target Sigma with addition in order to increase its attack. Now that we have two Cybursts on our side of the field, well, you know what time it is. It's time for Adamancipator. We'll activate Adamancipator's effect in order to grab from deck to hand a circular. We'll special summon the circular by sending a diameter to the graveyard. Then we'll activate Adamancipator's effect, targeting itself to tribute itself and cycle for the diameter. Here we can activate Circular's effect in order to grab from deck to hand a copy of Super Factorial. Then it is time to start Blink Summoning. These two to the graveyard. We are going to make a Disciple and a Devotee. Now, we've already exhausted Adamancipator's tribute effect, but we can use Disciple's tribute effect to send the Devotee, draw a card, then bin one of them. Here, we're going to retain that Super Factorial, probably a lot more important. We'll activate the effect of the Devotee in graveyard, summon 2 tokens. 2 of those tokens to the graveyard for a Wick Kid. 1 of those tokens for a Lingaribo. Wick Kid effect, we'll banish this Adamancipator, grab ourselves a copy of Diameter. And would you look at that, we have not yet normal summoned. We'll go Diameter, bring back a Circular, and then these 2 to the graveyard for a Masquerena. Notably, if you do need to start your turn with a normal summon that is not Diameter, you can do this entire line, you will just not get to the Masquerena. If so, make sure you are prioritizing sending a Diameter with the Circular because otherwise you will not have one in rotation. As I explained earlier, you will frequently find yourself in positions like this where you have redundant combo pieces in your hand. Use these as opportunities to test for hand traps. Here we'll activate Circular, declaring and sending a copy of Diameter to the graveyard. If our opponent responds to this with a Maxi, we can effectively Circular, normal summon a Sigma, trigger the effect of the Circular, grab ourselves a Super Factorial, overlay for Adamancipator, activate Adamancipator, and grab a Diameter for next turn. It's mostly the same combo, but we've neglected to give our opponent any additional cards. If they don't fire Maxi, well, we can just go for the exact same thing. We can just do the normal line. Here's something I don't recommend you do. Mathmech Circular, send Sigma. Special Sigma, trigger Mathmech Circular, grab a Super Factorial. Overlay for an Adamancipator. Adamancipator effect, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a copy of Diameter. Normal Diameter, special summon back any of these bad boys. Adamancipator effect, summon this back. Overlay all 3 for a turn 1 Laplacian. Handloop a card, and then you have a Super Factorial to do it again on your next turn. Again, this is very bad, but Coder said that I should show it off. This is a combo that was exceptionally powerful in game 3s, but still has a lot of application in best of 1 if you go first. Alimbertion technically can search any spell trap in your deck, so if you know what your opponent's on, or at least have an inkling, you can search a powerful Floodgate that will prevent them from playing at all. So here we're going to try that. We'll begin as always with Circular sending a copy of Sigma. We'll special summon the Circular, and then we'll activate the Sigma Engrave, summoning itself. We'll activate Circular's effect, grab ourselves a copy of Superfactorial. We will special summon our Extender. Here it's going to be the Addition. We'll go Addition to the graveyard in order to grab ourselves a copy of Link Disciple, and Circular to the graveyard in order to grab a Devotee. We'll activate the effect of the Disciple, distributing the Devotee. Here we won't bother doing the Yonky Splunky. We'll get 2 tokens. The Disciple and the token away for a Wicked, and the token away for a Lingaribo. We'll activate the Wicked, banish, whatever, and grab ourselves a Diameter. We will normal summon Diameter, activate the effect to bring back Circular, and then we will link off this Wicked and this Lingaribo for Splash Mage. We'll activate Splash Mage, targeting the Addition, and then that is 1, 2, 3, 4 for a 4-material Alimbertion. We'll activate Alimbertion's effect here, and remember this is protected because it was made with the effect of Diameter, and we will grab a Summon Limit. We will set the Superfactorial and that, and we'll pass back to our opponent. Let's try an Arrival Cyberstatic Nister line. Here we're going to go Circular for Sigma. We'll grab a Superfactorial here. These two are going to turn into an Alimbertion. And the Alimbertion is going to detach these two. We already have a Diameter in hand, so let's just get an Extender. How about Addition? We'll normal summon Diameter, bring back Circular. You know the drill, Disciple Devotee. Devotee mandatory, Disciple, or Alimbertion effect rather. Send the Devotee. Cycle back for a Circular. Devotee effect, 2 of these bad boys. Disciple in this to the graveyard for a Cyberse Wicked. Decent opportunity here to just get a Lingaribo in. You might as well. Lingaribo and Wicked to the graveyard for Splash Mage. Splash Mage effect for Diameter. Addition. And then any number of these, including one of the lights, for Masquerena. On our opponent's turn, when they go to main phase, we can activate Masquerena, use the Dark Masquerena, Water Splash Mage, the Light Circular, and the Earth Alimbertion for a 4-material Arrival Cyberstatic Nister that I forgot to put in the extra. Can you throw up Arrival Cyberstatic Nister, please? Some quick considerations before we move on to matchups. Mathmech Alimbertion is an Ash Blossom and Infinite Impermanence magnet. Expect that this is going to be negated. That doesn't mean you can't play around it. Each individual piece of extension is a way to beat back the badness that is getting hit here. Thankfully, Link Disciple still has a mechanism to tribute Devotee, even if you're not able to do so by way of Alimbertion. Occasionally, you won't need the search because you'll have either hard drawn into a Diameter or have been able to flex something like a Superfactorial for a search of an equation off of your Circular, or you've drawn into a Sigma and you will have a Diameter in graveyard by way of the Circular already, and you'll already have a setup Superfactorial. You should be planning from the get how you are going to continue to combo even if your Alimbertion doesn't work. Your stuff locks. A significant amount of your stuff locks in weird different ways. A lot of them have locks from summoning from the extra deck except for Cyberses, but there's also some other weird locks in this deck. For instance, Circular only allows you to attack with 1 monster over the course of the turn in which you activate it. This means that if you're able to set up a 2-material access code talker that attacks twice for 4,300, and you're doing so with an Alimbertion that's protected by a Diameter in order to hedge against a Nibiru, you should be attacking only with this monster. The game will see you have tried to attack with Alimbertion and will not let you do it with the other one. Branded's a little rough. If you're going first, like Tearlament, there are a lot of scenarios in which you can accidentally plus your opponent simply by using the effect of your Laplation. Send a card from their hand to the graveyard that has a graveyard effect, and they will thank you for it. What's more, frequently they'll be able to chase out a Laplation interaction without actually having to commit too much to the board. It's not like they're setting the field spell like they were 4 months ago. Branded excels in one area most decks these days fail: spot removal. You can take over almost any game state in which you are allowed to summon 2 monsters, but Branded is uniquely positioned to be the deck that prevents you from doing that. Mirror Jade, of course, is extremely powerful, but also a really early Branded in red for a Guardian Chimera can wipe your board and leave you without the ability to make an Alimbertion or anything for that matter protected by a Diameter. What's more, a significant amount of their monsters are unable to be targeted, meaning that you can't use Subtra and Addition targeting your opponent's monster to get them out on an otherwise empty board state. Careful about using Laplation in this matchup. Not only can it potentially plus your opponents if you send a card from their hand that wants to be in the graveyard exactly there, you can also accidentally turn turn on something like a Branded in Red that they set as a bluff and now is able to be activated. Watch your life points. The Taxman is really, really good against you in particular. Cards you would not expect to shine in this matchup are Harpy's Feather Duster and Cosmic Cyclone. They're in here mostly for Runick, but if you can prevent your opponent from having any of the powerful spells and traps that mean that Branded can either protect its life total by way of opening, or plus by way of Branded in Red, you're in a much better position. Branded's also got one more tool in their toolbox, which is really frustrating. Predaplant Dragostapelia not only negates the effects of your monster, it also changes its level to 1, which means it can't be part of an Xyz. Make sure that you are maneuvering your monsters in such a way that you don't care if one has to be used as material for a Link Disciple rather than half of an Alimbertian. This is your worst matchup. Look, you're a monotype deck, and they play There Can Be Only One. There's not too much to talk about, but you do have some game against a lot of their setups. Firstly, a significant amount of Runick players rely on Floodgates in order to interact with their opponent's board states. You are innately immune to Rivalry of Warlords. You have game against Skill Drain because Access Code Talker can banish itself in order to activate its effect, destroying the Skill Drain and allowing you to go over the top of some incredibly powerful cards. Your win condition in this matchup is not going to be the 2-material Access Code OTK like it is in most other decks. It is going to be running your opponent out of resources and forcing them to blank for exactly 1 turn. You can easily take over the game with something like a Transcode Talker plus a Decode Talker Heatsoul. You just gotta get there. Do not be afraid to pivot really early onto Prime Mathmech Laplation. Your opponent will probably be able to interrupt some portion of your combo using Flashing Fire and Freezing Curses. If you are left with level 4 monsters on your side of the field, stack them up, baby. Getting the field spell off the field as early as possible is something that you are uniquely positioned to do as a deck that does so without destroying it. Loplation is also removal for Hugin that does not cause its effect to trigger, which means that you can use Called by the Grave in order to keep second copies out of your opponent's extra monster zone. Usually your win condition in this match is going to be resolving 2 copies of Superfactorial, one to clean up the board state, and the second to ensure your opponent doesn't get the follow-up fountain. Swordsoul's been weird recently. It's like a round, but it's a mid-range deck that competes for metagame space with Branded, which is another mid-range deck that's better. Anyway, you should have a plan for it. This one's going to be weird. There's going to be a little ebb and flow to this matchup, but in general, your opponent's set copy of Blackout is going to be your main concern. Now, usually Swordsoul pilots won't fire the Blackout until they have already exhausted their Chi Shao. So you should expect what they're going to do is Chi Shao your Circular, and then when you bring back the Sigma, they will Blackout it. This, you may notice, leaves a Mathmech monster in your graveyard and has not committed to a normal summon. If you expect your opponent to play in that way, that is a prime time to normal summon a Diameter. If they also end on a Baron, things get a little crustier, but you're going second, so you do have a lot of ways to hedge against that. Again, Cosmic Cyclone and Harpy's Feather Duster work wonders, but you also have the ability to flex for extenders, get copies of Mathmech Equation if they don't negate your Circular. I usually don't spend too much time talking about going first because your deck's going first game plan is pretty much identical no matter what you're playing against, but Swordsoul's a bit of a special case. What you want to do obviously is use Laplation to trade for your opponent's normal summon so they're stuck on a token that prevents them from doing anything but synchro summoning and they don't have access to any of their powerful synchros. But if they lead Ecclesia after you've gone first, that card independently trades for your Laplation because they can tag out for a Moye, get a token, at which point you have to Laplation, and then you have to be able to retain the Laplation on field in order to negate their follow-up play. They can normal summon a Taya, you can negate the Taya's effect with the Laplation, but then they can use the token on field in order to synchro summon a Chi Shao. So you're going to have to play with that in mind. You might even want to let a Taya resolve just to negate the Chi Shao's effect. You might want to flex a copy of Masquerena for an Apollosa so you can retain the Laplation negate, force them to go to battle phase to walk over the Apollosa, and then activate the Taya in main phase 2, which will ensure that you're not dead and you can OTK on the crackback through almost any number of negates by way of the Diameter plus the equation stuff. It's a lot to think about. Lingaribo does a lot of work in this matchup because your opponent will usually have to use their normal summoned monster to walk over either your Apollosa or trade for your Laplation negate, and in that case, your Lingaribo gets to stay on the field and contest a set copy of Blackout. Just remember, if you negate that copy of Blackout, then it is going to get them a token. Win the die roll. And that's pretty much all I've got to say. I'm really excited for this deck coming to Master Duel. I think it's incredibly well positioned, but I also think it has a pretty short half-life. And for that reason, I hope that you will take these lessons to heart and try out Mathmech on ladder. I hope to see you at the top of Tier 1 very shortly.